We work with all the municipalities, all the local governments, critical infrastructure, small businesses, and we provide services to them.
Okay, Jill.
Yep, good morning, everybody. Jill Burkholder, I'm the Chief of Operations for the JCDC. Thank you for reading out all the acronyms in my title. The Chief of Operations is a fairly new role. I started about 2 months ago, so we're just kind of standing up this office, and it's to help drive the operations within the JCDC. And so when we originally stood up, it was all about working with our partners and putting up plans, and I'll talk a little bit about that during the questions. But now we wanted to put a little bit more focus on driving those operations with those partners, and so that was the creation of this new office, as well as driving those operations across other parts of the cybersecurity division, so our vulnerability management teams and our threat hunting teams and our capacity building teams.
Great. My name is Jason Gray. As mentioned, I'm the CIO for the U.S. Agency for International Development, which primarily delivers international development around the world. Humanitarian assistance, global health, food stability, security. So as CIO, I'm responsible for providing the IT services to close to 100 different countries and missions around the world. And it's making sure that they're secure, but also enable and empower the missions that they serve. So happy to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Fraser. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for New York City. What that basically means is some days we manage tech, some days we manage everything but tech. Tech is the cornerstone of how the city operates, so everything from our water utilities to our public safety mission, everything has a technology component. As part of being the Chief Technology Officer, I'm also responsible for New York City's cybersecurity mission. In the beginning of the administration, Mayor Adams and I launched a joint security operations center focused on just cybersecurity. And that's now a collaboration of both city, state, and federal partners that now have a reach that spans not just across the city, but in many cases across the nation and across the globe. When we talk about what New York City means from a cybersecurity perspective, we're talking about over 1 million endpoints. And when you look at what our attack vector looks like on a weekly basis, our weekly average is about 90 billion cyber events that we see. So there's a lot that we're looking forward to talking to, I'm looking forward to talk to with my panelists today.
No, thank you so much for that, and that's a great segue. So as I said, we're going to frame this around the public-private sector collaboration and partnership piece, which really has evolved beyond just this catchphrase, right? We're wholly dependent on each other. We're really moving away from one-off cyber attacks, and we are faced collectively with long-term persistent campaigns from nation states, right? So we really need to think about what types of authorities do public sector government entities have, and how can the private sector complement that and fill in some of those gaps, and how can we work together around collective defense and whole of community strategies to really build in long-term resilience to secure our networks and systems. And I'll say a good example of this was the war in Ukraine. When that war started, the US was obviously providing assistance, and CISA launched, if some of you recall, the Shields Up campaign. And the private sector was heavily involved in that, sharing telemetry and hardening guides with CISA, and CISA was then pushing that out to critical infrastructure owners and operators and state and local governments to basically help them defend themselves in the event that Russia launched any retaliatory attacks against the US because of the aid that we were providing. Fast forward to where we are today, and especially in Jason's role, when you think about the international component to this, we're seeing a surgence now in the State Department and USAID really thinking, what does cyber capacity look like? What does cyber defense assistance look like? And what is the US's role in that? So it's all very connected, and we'll try and pull on some of those themes today. So let me jump in, and hopefully we can provide a little bit more background on what some of these collaboration models look like. So Matt, I'll start with you. One of the themes that emerges every time we talk about public-private sector partnerships, and Jill and I were just talking about this over coffee, is resourcing. So back in 2022, NYC created the Joint Security Operations Center to bring federal, state, and local resources together in a single space under a unified command. Matt, what are the biggest benefits that you've observed through the JSOC, and where do you still see some challenges for resourcing and partnerships under that model?
Yeah, so for us, one of the reasons why we launched the JSOC is that we looked at the physical terror, the physical attack vector and what we saw from 9/11, and we looked at how the city recovered out of that and some of the things that we put in place. And we said, very likely the next target or the next attack front isn't going to happen on the physical landscape, it's going to be on the virtual cyber landscape. So how can we build a collaboration that's a representation not just of the things that are important that New York City controls, but also the things that we're dependent on our partners for? Over 90% of the things that we consider critical as a city, it's not something that the city operates. You think about your hospitals, you think about your grocery stores, you think about the financial institutions. The things that people experience day to day, a lot of it isn't controlled by the city. So the more that we invest in cybersecurity to secure the city's landscape, if those benefits and values are not driven back out to the private sector, and we're not ensuring that our most critical sectors are protected, then we put ourselves in a position where something happens, government services remain up, but some of our critical partnerships remain down. So after 9/11, one of the things that we did was we created a Lower Manhattan Security Initiative. So what that basically did was it took every building that had a private set of cameras in those facilities, chemical sensors, radiation sensors, and those kind of things. And we built a consortium so they could share that information with the New York City Police Department. So in the event that we saw a physical terror attack of any kind, we would have more awareness of what was going on and we could respond better as a collective. Now, from a cyber perspective, with the Joint Security Operations Center, we've built the same thing, but not just within the city, but across the state. So the way this got started was we had a conversation with the governor. The governor was looking to start its own cyber command. And we said, instead of having these one-off commands, let's build one that collects the information across the city and across the state and shares our capabilities across. So some of the value that we see, instead of each city within the state having to invest in security tool sets, we make major investments as an enterprise, we get economies of scale, and then we get reference architectures that we can deploy out. It's great. And commodity tools like EDR, instead of everyone having their own approach, their own flavor to that, we pick one and we push it across the entire state. So now that when we look at visibility, we have a common way that we look at the landscape across the board. And for those that didn't have the funding to invest in those types of tools, we can now, by just joining the collaborative, we can now give them access to those kinds of tools. So democratizing access to security tool sets is one of the biggest things that we've got as part of the Joint Security Operations Center. One of the things that we can do better is our public-private partnership. In our attack on physical terror, a large part of our success is the information that comes out from the private sector and the public back into government. We have to take some additional steps to start bringing some of that telemetry, some of that data, and sharing some of these capabilities with our private sector teams. So we've got working groups, we've got councils where we're sharing real-time intelligence around things that we see, but we have to take it to a next step where we have a common look at visibility while maintaining privacy and security.
Got it. Yeah, so I think thematically there are some really strong parallels. Jill, I'm going to go to you next to talk a little bit about JCDC. That organization was stood up to increase public-private sector partnership. We saw that immensely during the invasion of Ukraine, but some of the things I'm hearing, Matt, is really about that ability to scale and creating that common operating threat picture and sharing out that visibility. Jill, can you talk to us a little bit about the JCDC model and what that looks like at the federal level?
Yeah, absolutely. So JCDC was stood up in about 2021, so we're almost 3 years old, to establish relationships, to unify around the cyber defense mission. So we talk a lot about our partners. It's kind of our bread and butter, and our partners, we have a very broad reach. Everyone up here is a partner. We've got our state and local, tribal territorial entities, our federal government agencies, cyber threat intelligence companies, hardware and software vendors, cloud and internet service providers, international partners. So we have a very broad reach, and it's creating a platform to bring all of those partners together to share that information and provide us visibility that individually we wouldn't all have. So we were well placed in February of 2022 to bring all of those partners together to prepare for and respond to potential malicious cyber activity around Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so an example of how that plays out, we stood up with our partners, we stood up the Russia-Ukraine tensions plan, which laid out phases of coordination amidst the rising geopolitical tensions. So I think our model is really successful when we aim to achieve our goals, and we do that through the sharing of unique and timely information, which we get from all of our partners. We work to set up enduring capabilities for consistent sharing to exchange and enrich and act on information. And then another key part of that is the creation of cyber defense plans, creation and execution of cyber defense plans with our partners to proactively respond to and reduce risk in key areas. I think some of the challenges here are well, I'll talk a little bit about our 2024 priorities because I think that speaks to where we're trying to head, and it's where we are aligning our resources, and it's driving our strategic direction. So we have, first is to counter APT activities, so preventing or disrupting known and suspected malicious activity, abuse. Another one is raising the cybersecurity baseline. I have a saying that I like to use here, and my team is really tired of hearing it, but none of them are here, and you guys are a new audience, so I'm sure you've all heard this. A rising tide raises all ships. So how do we raise the bar for our critical infrastructure owners and operators? And I want to touch on 3 lines of effort within that priority. Security of elections infrastructure, driving down the impact of ransomware when it hits, and the fostering of a world where technology is secure by design. And then the last priority is around emerging technologies, so fostering rapid innovation in emerging tech like AI, which I know is a fairly hot topic here this week.
So along that vein, Jason and Mike, I want to kind of tie this. You represent a lot of different constituents and address a lot of technology issues. So when you think about how to harness this new technology and address critical needs that are emerging, regulatory guidance that's coming out, at both the state and federal levels. What do you think the role is of organizations like the JSOC and JCDC? And then specifically, how should they be helping deploy new technology like AI in a safe and secure way?
Want me to go first?
Right.
I'm a massive fan of public-private partnership and work very closely, certainly with CISA and other partners around the government, both public and private, because they're like the forefront and connect and allow you to collaborate and communicate with what is going on. A really good example that I know we all can relate to is the pandemic. That collaboration and the ability to communicate and learn from each other, to collaborate with the private sector to help overcome challenges that we didn't even know that we had was critical. When I look at the operating environment that I am responsible for now, operational readiness is key because some of the areas that we operate in are pretty challenging areas, and having that threat intelligence and having that communication and collaboration, which is why I know the first part of my tenure in this agency has been focused on building a really strong relationship with State Department. Within a few months of arriving, I got a call at 5 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, we're having to evacuate people from this mission, and it's through that collaboration and that intelligence that ensures that we're keeping people safe, we're keeping the mission safe, and the data and the technology associated with that as well. So massive fan, really important to collaborate and ensure that we're doing a better job.
Mike, what about you? How do you think that these models and these partnerships help secure that technology that you're going to be leveraging so much?
So you mentioned the collective defense, okay? It's not just the government working together. It's everybody in here that has to work together, share information, best practices, those models that you're talking about, whether it's AI or anything else like that. And I know Matt mentioned there's 90 billion events a week. We're about 9 billion per day, so we're not too far behind you in the state of New Jersey. All that data lends itself in that data science, itself into artificial intelligence and making better decisions so that with the limited resources that we all have, we can scale and better serve the constituents that are out there. So I think that's the work that we need to do, is to continue to work together, not just with us, but with everybody in the audience and everybody, whether it's public or private sector organizations.
Okay, and I think I'm going to go back a little bit, Matt, and I want to focus on organizational transformation and just the description of what you guys went through in the city. But Mike, I'm curious if you can share some of your highlights with your journey with the state's cybersecurity and communications integration cell. And you stood up an autonomous security operations center. What were some of the challenges, or what did that look like for you all?
So the challenge was back in 2015, then Governor Christie had an executive order to create the NJ-KIC to be the state's one-stop shop for cybersecurity. And at that time, we had 6 people. And really, Governor Christie, saw that cybersecurity was so important to public health, public welfare, public safety, the economy, and all the other public interests of the state. So this NJ-KIC was going to be this clearing of sorts. But in order to do that, we had to build it and we had to scale it. And I think anybody up here or anybody in government knows that change in government is really difficult. So being able to not say this is what we're going to do, but to actually show people and actually get them on board was the biggest part of our journey. That was the hardest. Herding all those cats with everybody in their own agenda and the like.
So along that vein, Matt, herding cats and getting that buy-in, I imagine when you came on as CTO that you inherited a lot of legacy systems that spanned across multiple agencies. How did you formulate and implement a vision for streamlining your technology priorities? How did you get consensus to do that over time?
Yeah, so I think for me, part of the magic is that I came from the law enforcement side of the world. So order, file, a process is something that entire end of the world moves on. So when we stepped into the seat and we took a look at not just the cyber landscape, but the state of the infrastructure and everything else, you ask yourself a couple of basic questions. It's like, okay, these legacy systems, what's our pathway to get off of it, and what's the timeline? And the things that we have that are known critical vulnerabilities, what we're doing about fixing those issues. And what tends to happen in the government side of the world, it's not universally true, but it happens more often than it should, is that sometimes in places like tech or cyber, people cannot tie a material action to the mission that they're actually serving. So when you live in the public safety space, in the law enforcement space, failing to do something means somebody will die. That's the reality. Somebody would die, or more people will die than should, right? Unfortunately, in the tech space, the consequence behind some actions mean a lot of the same. So that cost of an action really matters, doing something really matters, and making sure that we get it done in order really matters. So what we did was we called all of the CIOs across all of the various agencies together, and we had basically a State of the Union. And we said that prior to the start of this administration, tech didn't have a single voice. Tech lived in every agency itself. So we basically brought everyone together and we said, hey, there's a new sheriff in town. And we need to start moving as a city towards some of these strategic goals of making the city more safer, more secure, more resilient. So from a contracting perspective, the first thing that we did was we took control of every agency's budget and said, you can't spend $1 unless you come through us. And then what we did was we created a master catalog of every program that was going to be deployed across the city that had a net spend of $2 million or more. And then we created a priority behind it of what we would actually move forward and what we wouldn't. And by taking control of the finances, by taking control of the priorities, and by setting a pathway forward, we essentially put cybersecurity on the forefront of the priority list to make sure that everything that we did considered that as like the starting point. And what we've seen over the last 2 years is the amount of visibility that we have has gone up significantly. When we stepped in, the weekly average and the threats that we saw was around 70 billion. And now we're at 90, close to 100 billion events per week that we're collecting. And now a lot of that is through increased visibility, through pushing more cybersecurity tools out into the enterprise. And in terms of legacy infrastructure, we've created a pathway where we're no longer going to invest in things that doesn't further the city's bottom line strategic mission. So instead of buying more bare metal, instead of buying or deploying these one-off systems, making sure we're deploying things that are scalable and secure, and that we can secure.
I think, and pulling on this thread of organizational transformation, Jason, USAID has a global mission. You've got a global workforce. I think you're operating in 80 different mission areas, mission countries. Your agency was a pretty early adopter of cloud computing. How did you get consensus there? How has the ability to leverage cloud services helped support USAID's mission and objectives when you're so spread out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say I have only been at the agency a little over a year and a half, so I'm thankful to the amazing team at the agency who really brought that to bear. But I also agree a lot with what Matt was talking about on making sure that you're tying the impact of what you're doing and why you're doing this and why that technology is critical and important. I know in the last year we have updated our strategic plan to focus on making sure that everyone understands our alignment with the mission itself. It's not just about compliance. It's not just about following the law. Yes, it is about following the law, but it's not just about that. It's about making sure that we're supporting the missions and enabling and empowering them, which is really, in my view, how the cloud adoption was so critical. As mentioned earlier, some of the areas and countries that we operate in, even getting power, reliable power, is a massive challenge. Bandwidth concerns are severe, latency, and I will say that with the Google platform, it allowed us to communicate and collaborate, as I was mentioning earlier, that really, it just naturally happened where everyone wanted to embrace it because it was a solution that worked. Yeah. And that helped with the transition, and then with the collaboration and being able to collaborate across the world in real time through the document management, the security. As I was mentioning earlier, security is absolutely critical as well, and through knowing that you are encrypting data in use, in transit, at rest through the Google platform has been driving factors, because we're, yes, complying, yes, we're securing things, but also enabling our end users to communicate with the implementing partners and these other areas that we operate in.
Right, right. So Mike, I want to go back to your autonomous SOC and kind of hear a similar anecdote, if you would. You first took it to the cloud and then integrated some existing tools. What were some of the features or capabilities that are most important for cloud native tools for you all?
So scale and performance. Those are the top two, and that's the reason we went to the cloud. And I would rather move all the data up there and use the services and the performance in the cloud than have a team of engineers that are having to do that. That takes away from our cyber mission. So being able to do that in the cloud has been really helpful for us. It allows our cybersecurity analysts to focus on cybersecurity rather than on engineering and tech problems and all of those things.
So, and I'm just thinking back to, as far as like the day-to-day, Jason, with your global workforce, how are they using Workspace to communicate with each other? Anecdotally, what is that like, considering some of the mission spaces that you guys are in?
Seamless. I mean, to be honest, it's worked really, really well. Coming from a different environment to the Google environment, it's been fascinating to see the ability to share, collaborate seamlessly throughout the organization, externally as well, which is critical when we have implementing partners that we depend on to carry out and contribute to the mission. So that has been key. The ability to do like Google scripting has automated a lot of activities that we do as well. So it has worked seamlessly. It's one of those things that coming into an organization, not really being sure what I was walking into, I was pleasantly surprised. The adoption also, the willingness and eagerness of around the world for individuals to embrace the Google environment, and for us to be able to all work collaboratively together has been a phenomenal experience.
That's great to hear. So, Joe, in your role at CISA, what potential do you see for AI to create new opportunities for transformation and modernization for cybersecurity in the public sector? What types of hurdles do you think need to be overcome, and how can folks here help CISA do that?
Yeah, so I guess I'd go back to our partnership and sharing model. So in terms of AI specifically, we, I guess in February of 24, so just within the last couple of months, stood up something called JCDC AI, and this kind of ties back to one of our 24 priorities being around emerging technology. And so we're bringing together partners in this space, so including Google, owners and operators of critical infrastructure, security vendors, to collaborate around the use of AI, the safe use of AI, to put out guidance to the community around how to do this safely.
Okay. And Matt, so AI and machine learning are rapidly transforming how we approach cybersecurity. I think it's kind of hard to keep up. I feel like I'm overwhelmed by it. Even just our announcements today about Gemini Threat Intelligence and Gemini SOC is super exciting. But how are you proactively incorporating AI-powered tools and strategies to enhance, threat detection, incident response, and your overall security posture in the city?
Yeah, so I think there's, in this Gen AI moment, there's a lot of emphasis around just the term AI. And I think in the cybersecurity space for a very long time, a lot of what we've been doing is artificial intelligence of some way, shape, or form. Whether it's through the detection and self-healing of incidents as they happen, whether it was through automated blocking, there was a lot of capabilities that we were using that are traditionally in the AI space as defined today. When you look across the amount of threats that we see and how we're able to deal with that, a lot of it is done through our partnership with Google, but of the 90 billion threats that we see on a weekly basis, we distill that down to less than 50 things that human analysts actually have to look at. Right, and the way that we do that is that we use a lot of artificial intelligence in the background to weed out the things that doesn't matter and assign high threat scores for the things that we should actually take a look at and prioritize those. I think going forward, some of the things that we're very, very interested at using AI for is more human-based intelligence. So when you look across the city, we have a workforce of over 330,000 people. And that workforce has people that serve in many different roles. So when someone is assigned and they have a role that's fairly generic, but they have a high level of access, how are we working to ensure that when those credentials are used and when that access is used, it's used in a way that's commensurate with the job that they're actually performing? And I think for us, we spent a lot of time making sure that we understood what's coming in the enterprise, what's moving laterally within the enterprise, and using AI to sort of combat that threat. But I think now we're moving more towards using AI to understand user behavior so that we can deal with the next level of threat. Like if you look, we're in Vegas, and if you look at some of the recent threats that's happened, it happened because with a couple of the casinos, someone picks up the phone, they make a phone call, they perpetrate as their help desk operator, they get access to the credentials, they get access to the system, and they lock people out, right? If we understood user behavior a bit more, we could determine those anomalous patterns, and we could automatically block that type of activity from happening. So when I think about where New York City's heading, I think the whole thing of looking at the perimeter, looking within the enterprise, that was yesterday's mission. Tomorrow's mission and what we're moving towards is making sure that we understand the movement of our users so that when any of those credentials or anything gets done in the enterprise, we can take a more tactical approach on how we deal with those types of threats.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love the anecdote about observing the users, but also it's making me think back to at the start of the war in Ukraine. We heard from a lot of our intel folks on the Mandiant side that they loved the mission but hated the job. So these were men and women who were hands on keyboard, helping 24 hours a day, and their ability to keep up, they were just absolutely exhausted. And so being able to use AI to the defender's advantage is going to really have massive impacts on the cybersecurity workforce in general. So lots of opportunities there. So Mike, can you share some specific examples as well of how AI is enabling your organization to achieve better outcomes, whether that's through efficiency, improved risk assessments, or just more proactive defense strategies in general?
Yeah, so we didn't start with AI in mind when we started collecting all this data. So 9 billion events a day, over a year, that comes into by. And that helped me. I'm a logaholic. I love logs and stuff, and we wanted to see trends, and we wanted to pick out those things, user behavior, and identify those. But what has happened is the machine learning tools and the models that have been brought into the platform have allowed us to do all sorts of other things that the security tools don't allow us to do. We can go back in time and find little needles in the haystack that we couldn't do before. So having that data allows our data scientists, and I have a few in the room, that are just doing amazing things with it on the platform at scale. The other thing that we're doing, and we do risk assessments. Every water system in New Jersey has to report into us, and we do risk assessments. Every one of them, every utility, every public agency in the state also has to do that. So being able to take all that data in and then provide reports using Gen AI to do that is really something that we're working on now. And we hope it can make our job a lot easier going forward, because writing risk assessment reports, if anybody's done it in here, knows how tedious, time-consuming that is. But to be able to use AI to help with that would be very helpful.
Thank you so much. So I think you've got a captive audience here. I think I want to start with Matt. We'll go down the line. I'd be curious to hear from each of you, circling back to the top of our discussion around, we're trying to balance and reconcile an evolving cyber landscape, increasingly challenging threat actors who are financially motivated, among other things. What do you need most out of your partners, not only your government partners in the public sector, but from the private sector as well? Matt, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think for us, visibility, communication is the thing that we need more than anything else. When you look at I look in the recent past, one of the things that's been most significant, the war between Russia and Ukraine is interesting, but perhaps one of the most interesting things happened a year prior to that with SolarWinds. What that supply chain manufacturer that got compromised, now in one compromise, almost every US intelligence agency was compromised. Very interesting, right? And that shows you, the only way we were able to get through that was through the power of community. Mandiant was the person Mandiant was the entity that detected that something was wrong. They blew the whistle, they said, we believe that we may be compromised. And then from there, the rest of the world jumped in and they said, all right, let's see what's going on with this. And sure enough, we saw that the core technology had been compromised, and now that was penetrating multiple enterprises. I think for us, that practice of community, that practice of sharing information, that practice of working collaboratively towards that one common mission, I think that's the one thing that we need. And in that requires amount of trust so that people can be vulnerable. It's not easy to say that you've been compromised. It's not easy to say that you're up to your neck in something that you don't know how to deal with. And I think that the more that missions like the JCDC or the JSOC get stood up, it's going to be highly dependent on our partners being fairly transparent and trusting us to help them when they're in a situation that they don't know how to get out of.
Right, and also reciprocity too, right?
Exactly,
so
yep. Public
public sector also then taking whatever they're gleaming sector and pushing that back out into the community. As you said, Jill, rising tide raised all ships, right? Jason.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The collaboration, transparency, and trust, I would say, are essential because, at least in my role, most of the time, at that time, it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It's how do we work together to overcome, to mitigate, to minimize damage and impact. And that trust and collaboration. Again, as I said earlier about the pandemic, when that happened, the world came together to figure out how do we overcome these challenges, supply chain risk management, even supply chain availability, massive challenges, and the community was there and said, hey, we've got these other ways that you can still meet these security requirements and still enable your mission, empower your mission. And I think that's what we're going to need going forward. As we continue to navigate this landscape, I'm thinking about all these countries we operate in and that transparency about if there is a challenge and a risk, raise it so that we can all get together and figure out how do we overcome it together.
Right. Thank you. Shell?
I guess I would just echo what these gentlemen said. Transparency, trust, sharing. We can't do anything we can't do any of the things that we do with it at JCDC without those things, and we're really relying on partner sharing. We do try to share back as much as we can, but ultimately our goal is to get unique, timely information to share that out to the broader ecosystem to drive down risk, and the transparency and the trust in those relationships is really critical to doing that.
Mike?
Yeah, and I say this all the time, it's not feasible that any one entity is going to be able to defend against nation-state actors, cybercrime syndicates that are transnational in nature, the ransomware groups, even hacktivists. We've seen most well-resourced companies, at the top Fortune 100 levels, and even here in Las Vegas, some of the big casinos, being taken down by kids, if you will. This collective defense is real. Trying to do this on our own, it's not going to work. So we need to partner with you. We need to partner with one another. Collectively, we'll be able to defend better than we will individually.
Well, thank you guys so much. We have 1 minute left, and I told them I would embarrass them a little bit. I don't know if they'll be embarrassed, but I always like to ask this question of our panelists just so maybe you kind of glean something from them. But we'll go down the line in the opposite direction. Tell us either the book you're currently reading or the last book you've read.
So the last book I read was The Worlds I See by Fei Li, who is the godmother of AI, if you will, who's also a New Jersey native, came from China, just like my wife came from overseas and stuff. So a lot of parallels there, and it's just a great read. It's not just about AI, it's about humanity and her journey to be that godmother of AI. So great book.
Jill?
I said I don't like this question because I read a lot of trashy books. It's how I put my mind to rest at night. But I will say the last book related to this field that I read was still a fiction book, but I think it's a great book, and I might script the name of it. It's like Ghost Ship. I don't know if any of you have heard of that book. It's a really great read, and it's kind of about, it's cyber warfare, I would say. It's a super interesting read.
Jason?
So, much like you, when I read, it's usually not about work-related activities because I get my full share of that. I think the most recent book I read was The Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Fantasy, but amazing book about triumph in adversity when you're set down one path, and there's a lot of parallels that I could certainly tie to government as well. Great book.
I just read that as well. It's very good.
And Matt?
Sorry, what constitutes as a book? I mean, I read a lot of manga. I mean,
not on an iPad, not on a
yeah,
machine.
all right. Yes, One Piece is out there. All right. So great. So there's the last book that I read, if we're not counting manga, I read Discipline Equals Freedom by Jocko Willink. Right? Great book. When you open the book, one of the things it says is, there's no shortcut, there's no easy way. There's only one way, so just go get after it, right? And it's making sure that in life, the things that you want, you know what you want, you know what it's gonna take to get there. Don't expect anyone just to hand something to you. But the book I'm currently reading, which is super interesting, it's called The Happiness Hypothesis. So what it basically is about is looking at life and like the gateway to happiness. And then like in life, there's certain decisions that we can make that can make us all happy, and there's certain things that we can make that will make us miserable. So in life, if you have like, if you're in a bad job or in a bad relationship or something like that, that's not something that just making a coping mechanism that can deal with, because it's like having a tag in your shoe. So those types of changes require real changes to make progress, while everything else is, you can figure out ways around that.
Yeah.
So I think those two books are really great things you guys should look at. One Piece as well.
Well, thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of next. Thank you.